Hello, I'm Jennifer Brown, Director of the Center for Literary Arts at Frostburg State University. I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's reading by Adam Day. Uh, but before we begin, I'd like to thank those without whom we would not be able to do what we do. Those people or groups include the Allegheny Arts Council, the City of Frostburg, the Community Trust Foundation, and several offices at Frostburg State University, including the Office of the President, the Office of the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Department of English and Foreign Languages and Literature. We also have to thank Joanna Skelly, through whom all things are possible, and also Fred Powell of Main Street Books, who does have copies of Left-Handed Wolf in stock and would surely appreciate your purchasing that book. Adam Day is the author of Divine Orphans of the Poetic Project, Left-Handed Wolf, Model of a City in Civil War, and a chapbook, Badger Apocrypha. He also directs the Baltic Writing Residency in Sweden, Scotland, Asheville, and Blackacre Nature Preserve, and will publish the forthcoming Journal of Literature and Culture, Action, Spectacle. Please join me in welcoming Adam Day.
Thanks so much for having me in this historical moment of lockdown. It's nice to at least figuratively make it somewhere beyond the local. I'm going to start out reading some poems from Left-Handed Wolf. These poems are inspired in part by my meditation practice and principles of Buddhism, but they also harken back to ancient Japanese and Chinese primarily poetry, much of which was itself Buddhist. Some written for the courts, the royal courts. So I'll begin with one called Valyana. Beyond the dunes, pairs of gunmetal giant ibis, bits of string in nervous beaks. Wind blows tarps off tanks, secreted on the beach. Like children with their mania for taking out doll's eyes to see what's behind. Cumbersome empire. Osho. Homing bells ring in mountain fog where lynx have been. Sleeves wet, mind beetling around abandoned housing projects. Ceiling rain from waylaid pipes, streaming stairwells where my cousins lived. Set for demolition. Vacant rooms of dust and animal tracks. I don't tend to write autobiographically. Really almost never in a direct way. But there are moments in this book and in some of the poems that I'll read from some newer writing that do have those elements. Pella. The men in the woods, young in shirts and shoes, hair and hands, tall grass, wet calves, reeds at the red legs of electrical towers, pimpled with bolt heads. So these poems are pretty short. My running joke with my editor at LSU was how much money they were putting into a book that was composed mostly of white space. Fudo Inn. Stars break chairs, and the plants smell red in the night. For a long time, and to be frank, I still feel this way often. There are no haiku in this book, but when I read and read haiku, often I feel not fully satisfied. It's probably a failing on my part. But these poems, initially inadvertently, and then I think purposely, were an attempt at being more concise in my work. I've always been fascinated and focused in my writing on imagery. That comes through here, but there's a lot more focus on letting the image stand for so many things that otherwise the author might say. Nikaya, a thing in me, a bird or something, smashing snails open, dragging dark waters. Anami, blue mountains. I'll start over. Blue mountain makes white snow. The trees are pulling up anchor. There is this awareness within myself, and I can't help but think it's somewhere in the work that our lived context is further and further from the natural world, which isn't inherently a criticism or a critique, but so much of poetry, certainly historically, but I think even in the contemporaneous atmosphere, has been and is focused on the natural world, and alternatively on the urban space to an extent. The suburbs, interestingly, are often neglected in poetry, it seems to me at least. And yet they often seem the very heart of contemporary and modern American fiction. But in any case, I'm always wondering how poets in a world that becomes more and more technological begin to bring that into their work. To keep it relevant, to keep it relevant. In any case, Amida. Eating now, eyes drawn to the wide wrinkled 2-potato sack of balls at his crotch, like soldiers on tour, staring at strange ground. It's funny, they say, whoever they is, that you can live your entire life with someone, a partner, a sibling, a parent, and never really know them. And I kind of feel the same way about our bodies, both inside and out. They do much of what they want to do, and even on the exterior, seem to always be hiding something, good or bad. Yeah. So reading through Zoom or the like, one becomes deeply aware of silences, probably the way one does on the radio. When you read live, you've got faces to look at, even if there's silence. Um, this is a different experience. And this is actually my first reading by way of a computer. So, yeah, interesting to say the least. It makes looking for that one specific poem seem like a much longer process. Patini. The tree is smarter. It has stopped moving. Sava. Silence amid swinging bird feeders. The moon dragging its tail behind silver pines. Cold and falling night. It drops into the green river, glowing ditch dog, and the water is cool. The chilled crane in its cloud nest hasn't roused yet. Lives in between. Smug motherfucker. I've spent a lot more time. I live in Louisville, and the city is surrounded by the periphery of the city is parks. There are a lot of parks within the city itself, many of them designed by Frederick Olmsted, who also designed many of the parks in New York, like Central Park and Prospect Park. I've spent more and more time in those spaces and realize more and more without the least bit of romantic sentiment that trees and moss and animals and insects are way smarter than we are. Schinken. Drinking her own milk like a sailor singing into a rock wall. Can't see the hand, but its shadow. Kapala. The little girls from down the road don't take shit. Hate witnesses. They're up the red oaks, cigarette filters crushed in ironweed, bone and amaranth clouds piss into the river horizon. Screen door smacks and wind. Yard of broken bricks, 2 dead moles blue in the dusk. Walking out finally across the damp grass, drunk toward the river. So I don't know when, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I discovered a poet many centuries back called Ikkyu, a Buddhist poet. But he wrote a lot about his time spent in brothels and drinking and sex, and there was this intersection of the reflective and serious commitment to the principles and the rituals of Buddhism, but also the recognition of the grit of life. People tend to think of monks as living a secluded life, but today and certainly very much in the past, they were out among the people, in part because they had to beg for their meals. That was part of their way of life. And so to think of, I don't know, a poem invested in spirituality or the natural world as detached from those um, more visceral experiences of bowel movements or blood or sex or the filth of the streets, um, is is really odd. Um, and so I've got a real interest in that. And interestingly, in the contemporary moment, the poets I see doing the most work with that, though this is a huge generalization, really are women. Poets like Catherine Wagner, um, Danielle Pafunda, um, Darcy Denigan, um, and of course I'm blanking now on others. Um, and I actually asked one of the poets I just named why it is that women poets are writing some of the most fascinating poetry right now, and that was a couple years ago. So right now, really, spans the last 5 or 6 or more years. And she said, she it was simple. She said because they're pissed off, and I thought that was a great response. uh, and it also speaks to a change, perhaps, in the expectations of publishers of what they may want or not want from uh, writers of certain identities, um, which is good because I think we've read enough poems about wild irises. Uh, so I'm gonna read some newer poems. Living in Louisville, I grew up here. I moved away at 18. I came back. Fiddling with my computer now. Let's see, do I hit the wrong button? And um, I grew up in a really working class part of town, um, integrated quite literally between a trailer park and the projects. My aunt and cousins lived in that public housing. And our end of town is where a lot of immigrants ended up because it was really affordable and because the community services were there. And so the generations of refugees, whether it be Vietnamese or people from the former Yugoslavia, Sudan, Iraq, ended up in that neighborhood, which was interesting because being working class and in Kentucky, and I'm going to give my permission to make this generalization, my neighborhood was pretty rednecky. So it was an interesting intersection of cultures, uh, all of whom shared primarily solely in common that they were low income. Um, and so we were exposed far less so than African Americans, um, but to some extent exposed to some of the prejudices that exist in opposition to um, those who struggle um, with resources. Um, and so when what happened with with Brianna wasn't a huge surprise. She lived not far from where I grew up, and coincidentally, I found out after the incident that one of my middle school friends, who I grew up skateboarding with, is now the assistant police chief in Louisville, and was in charge of police movements the night that another local African American gentleman was shot and killed during the protests around Brianna. In any case, that's a little bit of background. These poems are still sort of interested or invested in, a Buddhist sort of worldview, but also with the socio-political context, something that's always been important to me. Most of these poems don't have titles yet. This one is called Object Landscape. The wind does not talk among the stones or precinct shells. Stone rolled in the mouth, whirled as will. There's nothing hiding in the branches. Cherry blossoms are here and gone. Another poem. Wind turning over secrets to the authorities under the black cypress. Best to remain indoors, avoid the errorists. Now, how to translate this for tomorrow's Good Morning show? I've never really tried my hand at writing what I would consider sort of political poetry. A friend of mine, another poet, and I had this conversation a long time ago about, that we thought then, and I still think that the hardest poetry to write is love poetry and political poetry, because they both just seem to damn you to loss of objectivity. And that loss of objectivity, to my mind, almost always gives birth to not the greatest writing, often one-sided, or overly sentimental. So in any case, in this moment, these poems came organically. Whether they work or not, who knows? Conscious or unconscious, libidinal thought, latent beneath manifest order to stop and frisk, or individuals are gently crushed by the force of labyrinthine environment. Still, moonlight fucks the cell's window bars, priapic hunger, and the secession of day and night. The need is large, the field large. Water bottles, haywire dance, rubber bullet song, hip on hip territory arrangement, nurse hands slipping the dark, roped rain light and masks, like a cupboard holding a lost generation. A live body can be punched in the back. So can a dead one. He died in a holding cell for smoking loud at the park. Thirsty heat inside himself like a thirsty heat inside himself like a nomad shearing sheep. At home, the cat drank from the bath, one paw balanced on his someone's knee. There's nothing hiding outside in the branches. Flaming shingles fly above the streets outside neighbor's apartment. Playing NBA 2K21, blasting DJ Screw, wretched of the earth on the end table, white fist raised, curtain closed. Young folk walking rawly the expanse of reality. Needless to say, I find really amusing people invested in popular or pop Black culture, ostensibly concerned with issues surrounding those who lack the resources due to class and/or identity, and yet uh, who stand primarily on the sidelines. Objective landscape. The wind does not talk among the stones or precinct shells. Stone rolled in mouth. I think I've read this poem already, so I'm going to stop reading it. How am I doing on time? Let's see here. Hold on one second. I think you are muted and I can't.
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe a couple more.
Yeah, we'll do just a couple more. Yeah, here we go. My relatability makes me sympathetic. No? Poverty, family crime, scraping pig renderings from chemical tanks. Allies woke as Whole Foods, tattoos and Vespas, downward facing dog, and picking their own fruit. Still no essence and phenomenon, no permanent self, just losing the strange things we never understood and slipping into the stream. I'll make this one my last one. It's called Crooked Fever. In Louisville, we tie hemp rope around Major General Breckinridge's neck. The separation from plinth gesturing at identity formation, and Louis XVI's marble hand is broken off. Though in late 1700s France, the commune took his head. Performance of protest. Fairy tales are real, but they have corpses and men pushing empty strollers. All right, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Adam, thank you so much. We ordinarily would have, I've put out a call in the chat for questions or comments, but I don't see any yet.
Okay.
But I'm so appreciative of your reading.
Yeah.
Grateful for your being with us.
Yeah.
Especially that this is your first Zoom reading that we share that experience with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a learning process. Thank you so much for having me.
Indeed. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Okay.